Councillor Zambrogno.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish that people would not build or live on land that is at serious risk of flood. That concern goes all the way back to Governor Phillip. Governor Macquarie caused a proclamation adjuring people to cease this willful and wayward habit of living on flood-prone land as early as 1810. But I'm really torn about this plan because I want to put the good work in this plan to work, but I can't ignore the effects on the 5,000 homeowners who have the misfortune of living on land that is below the current 1 in 100 level because they built there before those flood height controls even existed. A really good example would be a media report that I read from September of last year where Malcolm Chew has a 10-acre property in the Hawkesbury district and then was told by his insurer that his premium rose 47.5% in one hit and that he was being asked to pay $6,600 a year for flood insurance. Further, that his insurer was disinterested in any mitigation measures that he had put into effect to try and mitigate that risk on his own property because the insurers really only rely on a dot on the map and that's it. Many people have contacted me with similar stories. I note that in many of the public submissions to which we see the responses here, the staff response was, the management options identified will not change existing flood risk and therefore have no influence on property values, on property insurance or value. I think that statement's wrong. I think it's madness to think that this will not have an impact on people's property values or their insurance premiums. Of course it doesn't change the actual risk, but the word risk entails a subjective assessment of what that risk is. This does change our perception and definition of that risk, so it's not a tenable statement. If you want proof, the Insurance Council of Australia gave a submission to a federal inquiry that was held between May and November last year into the impact of climate risk on insurance premiums and availability. One of the findings of that parliamentary inquiry said that insurance companies should be forced to disclose insurance premium calculations, including how mitigation measures affect prices. The way that insurers calculate risk and therefore premiums is opaque, and this inquiry discovered precisely that. It's furthermore, a fact sheet put out by the Insurance Council of Australia to discuss flood risk for a lay audience says that the way that insurers calculate that risk is by using the National Flood Insurance Database, which is not a public database. And furthermore, it's up to individual insurers to decide what criteria they use to determine flood risk, and it may include information from many sources, including local government flood mapping. The Insurance Council of Australia effectively says that they are looking keenly at what we say and that it affects premiums, estimation of flood risk, and therefore has a knock-on effect to property value. This is the same organisation that opposed raising Warragamba Dam, which was still provably the only capital measure that would significantly mitigate flood risk. The state government put out a media release prior to the last state election saying that they would sink $225 million into the construction of levees at Peachtree Creek, McGrath's Hill and Pitt Town. It doesn't escape my attention that this comprehensive report scotches that idea. It says it's a terrible idea. It says on page 22 that it was the least favourable of all the proposed options. And on page 59 that a levee would need to be 9 kilometres long, 14 metres high to protect the townships of Windsor, Pitt Town, McGrath's Hill and Wilberforce, and would create almost zero mitigation. Some properties would be slightly more protected. Many properties that were not at flood risk would become at risk of flooding, and therefore that idea. And of course, we now have a state and federal government that is disinterested in offering us any capital solution that will mitigate our risk. It's against that context that I feel quite torn about whether we should support this, with or without the carve-out that Councillor McMahon suggested. So I'm going to be listening very carefully to the debate. I am undecided.
Thank you, Councillor.